I pulled up to the curb and sat there for a full 10 seconds before my brain caught up with what my eyes were seeing. A moving truck was parked in my driveway. Not beside it. In it. Taking up the whole space like it belonged there. Engine ticking, back doors swung wide open. 2 men in gray uniforms were carrying my grandmother's dining table through my front door. The same table I had wrapped in moving blankets myself. The same one I had driven 4 hours to collect after the funeral. They carried it like it was nothing. My younger sister Olivia stood in the entryway with her arms crossed and a smile on her face. My mother Diane was beside her, holding a ring of keys. My keys, and talking to one of the movers like she was directing a school play. Got out of my car. My overnight bag dropped from my hand onto the pavement and I didn't stop to pick it up. "What is going on?" called out. Diane turned slowly. She didn't flinch. She didn't look caught. She looked like a woman who had already rehearsed this moment and decided exactly how she was going to stand through it. "I gave your house to your sister," she said. The air left my body completely. "My name is Claire Whitaker. I'm 28 years old. And that house was supposed to be the one thing in my life that no one in my family could ever take from me. I need to tell you about Olivia before I tell you anything else, because none of this makes sense without her. Olivia was my mother's favorite. Not in the quiet, subtle way that some families try to hide. In the open, obvious way that everyone around us could see and nobody ever said out loud. Olivia got the longer hugs. The phone calls that lasted an hour. The benefit of the doubt when she made mistakes, and she made a lot of them. She dropped out of college twice. She left 3 jobs in 4 years. She borrowed money from my mother, from relatives, from anyone who would hand it over, and she never paid any of it back. But every time she fell, Diane was already at the bottom with her arms out, ready to catch her. I was different. I was the one Diane called strong. She said it like a compliment. It took me years to understand it was actually a door she was quietly closing. Strong meant she didn't have to worry about me. Strong meant I could handle disappointment. Strong meant when she had to choose between us, she had already decided. The house had been the first thing I ever built entirely by myself. Paid for. Applied for. Trained for. Moved into. And standing in that driveway watching strangers carry my grandmother's furniture into it, I realized with horrible clarity that my family had never once thought of it as mine. They had always been waiting for a reason to redistribute it. My boyfriend at the time was named Kevin. He had driven with me that weekend, sitting in the passenger seat, listening to music, and saying nothing about where we were headed or what we might find when we got there. When I turned around from the driveway and found him standing behind me, I expected him to say something. To step forward, put his hand on my shoulder, look at my mother and ask what was happening. That was what I expected from someone who loved you. Instead, he touched my arm gently and pulled me a few steps to the side. "Maybe your mom had her reasons," he said quietly. I stared at him. "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. The way he was looking at the ground told me everything before he opened his mouth again. "How long?" I asked. He didn't answer. He pressed his lips together and looked somewhere past my shoulder, like the answer might be hiding in the tree at the edge of the yard. That silence hit me harder than anything Diane had said. Because Diane had always been capable of this. I had always known, somewhere deep down, that my mother's loyalty had a shape and I wasn't always inside it. But Kevin was supposed to be different. Kevin was supposed to be mine. The fact that he had known and said nothing, had sat in that passenger seat and said nothing, broke something in me that the house alone never could have. I needed a moment away from all of them. Away from the movers and the truck and Olivia's smile and Kevin's useless silence. I walked around to the back of the house and let myself in through the side door. The kitchen still smelled like my grandmother. Something floral and clean that I had never been able to name but always recognized. I stood in the middle of it and breathed. That was when I saw the folder. It was sitting open on the counter. Papers fanned slightly to one side like someone had been reading through them and set them down in a hurry. The top page had a heading in bold type. Family Transfer Agreement. My mother's signature was at the bottom in her careful, looping hand. I leaned in to read more. Olivia appeared in the doorway and crossed the kitchen in 3 quick steps, snatching the folder closed before I could finish the page. She pressed it against her chest and looked at me like I had been caught doing something wrong. But I had already seen what I needed to see. Near the bottom of the visible page before she pulled it away, I had noticed the property parcel number printed in small type, and something about it was wrong. The last 4 digits didn't match what I had memorized from my own closing documents, the numbers I had stared at for weeks before I signed them, because I was the kind of person who memorized things like that. I didn't say anything to Olivia. I just turned and walked back out to my car. For the first time since I pulled up to that curb, I stopped feeling only heartbreak. Something sharper had started growing underneath it. Something that felt very much like suspicion. I drove until I found a motel 40 minutes away. The kind with a small parking lot and doors that opened directly outside, and a vending machine that hummed too loudly in the corridor. Paid cash. I took the key and sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. Cried. I won't pretend I didn't. I cried for about an hour, and most of it was about Kevin. The house was a wound, but Kevin was a different kind of hurt. He had sat beside me in that car knowing what was waiting. He had handed me a coffee from the petrol station and asked if I wanted music on. He had let me be completely unprepared while he already had the information that would have changed everything. But sometime after midnight, when the tears had dried up and I was lying on top of the covers still fully dressed, something shifted. I stopped asking why they had done it. That question had too many soft, painful answers and none of them would help me. I started asking something different. How did they think they could? What gave them the confidence to put a moving truck in my driveway and hand my sister a set of keys? What made them believe that this was possible? What were they relying on? They were relying on me not knowing something. That much was clear. The question was what? I had a locked storage box in the boot of my car. I kept it there because I traveled for work sometimes and certain documents needed to stay with me. Inside it were my original closing papers from when I purchased the house 5 years ago. The next morning, I sat in the motel car park in the early light and went through every page. Most of it I remembered. The mortgage terms, the insurance schedule, the title confirmation. But near the back of the folder, behind the pages I had read 100 times, was a section I had signed and then largely forgotten because a solicitor had explained it quickly and I had trusted the explanation. It related to my grandmother's estate. The house had originally been purchased using an inheritance from my grandmother, who had passed away 6 years ago. To receive the funds cleanly and protect the asset from certain claims, the property had been placed into a simple protective trust arrangement at the time of purchase. The trust named me as sole beneficiary, and the clause that stopped me cold was one I had to read 3 times before it settled in. My mother Diane had no legal standing over the property. She had never been listed as trustee. She had never been named in any ownership capacity. She had signed nothing at the time of purchase except as a witness to my signature. Diane had given away a house she had never legally owned. I called a property solicitor that same morning. Her name was Naomi Bennett, and she had been recommended to me by a colleague who said she was the kind of person who didn't waste words. I explained what had happened as clearly and calmly as I could manage. I told her about the moving truck, the transfer agreement, the parcel number discrepancy, and the trust clause I had found in my closing documents. She asked me to come in that afternoon and bring everything. I drove straight there. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a building near the town center, and she met me at the door herself. She was sharp-eyed and quiet. She sat across from me and read through my documents without speaking. When she finished, she set the papers down and looked up. "Claire," she said, "your mother had no legal authority to transfer this property. None at all." I nodded slowly. "The trust places ownership entirely with you," she continued. "Any transfer attempted without your written consent, and without proper trust dissolution, is simply invalid. It doesn't exist in the eyes of the law." I sat with that for a moment. "So Olivia isn't living in her new house," I said. Naomi shook her head. "She is living inside a mistake. A significant one." He paused. The question now is how far this has already gone and what exactly they tried to sign. She opened her notepad. Let's find out, she said. Naomi advised me not to confront them immediately. She explained clearly why. If they knew I had spoken to a solicitor and understood my legal position, they would start making moves to cover their tracks. Documents could disappear. Stories could be aligned. I needed a small window of time to gather information before they realized I was doing it. So I did something that went against every instinct I had. I drove back to Diane's house the following evening and I acted defeated. I told her I was sorry for how I had reacted. I said I had spent the night thinking and I understood that she had done what she felt was right for the family. I said I didn't want conflict. Every word tasted terrible coming out of my mouth. But I watched what it did to the room. Diane's shoulders dropped immediately. The tension she had been holding since I drove away came loose. She smiled and said she knew I would come around eventually. Olivia became smug instantly. She crossed her legs and tilted her head and spoke to me the way people speak to someone who has just been reminded of their place. Kevin, who was inexplicably still there, looked visibly relieved. For the first time in my life, I let them believe I was the smaller person in the room. And they fell for every second of it. 3 days after I acted defeated, Olivia started posting online. She gave her new home a hashtag. She photographed every room, every corner, every updated surface. She had already repainted the hallway in a pale green the first would never have chosen. She had bought a new sofa and a coffee table and a set of pendant lights that hung over the dining area like she'd had them planned for months, which I realized she probably had. But it was what Naomi discovered beneath the surface that stopped my breath. Olivia had applied for a personal loan using the property address as her residence and implied asset. The loan had been processed and approved before the legal situation could catch up. Then Naomi found something else. Olivia had approached a local lender about refinancing, using the house as collateral. She was borrowing against a property she had never owned. Naomi laid it out plainly. Every financial decision Olivia had tied to that address made her exposure worse, not better. Each loan, each application, each document that listed the house as an asset deepened the legal problem she was standing in without knowing it. She thinks she's building something, Naomi said. She's digging a hole, I replied. Naomi nodded. And she is doing it very efficiently. I thought about Olivia's smile in that doorway. The certainty of it. Ease. She had moved into that house the way she moved into everything in life, assuming someone had already cleared the way and that the consequences belonged to other people. For once, they were going to belong to her. I met Kevin for coffee one last time. I told him I needed closure. That was the word I used, and I watched him relax when I said it because it sounded like surrender. It sounded like a woman tying things up neatly before moving on. We sat at a small table near the window of a cafe we had been to before, when things were different, and he apologized in the careful way that people apologize when they think the storm has already passed. He said he hadn't understood how serious it was. He said he thought Diane meant well. He said he genuinely believed it was a family matter he shouldn't involve himself in. Then I asked him directly, "Did she ask you to keep me away that weekend?" He went still. "Kevin." He looked at the table. "She asked me to make sure you didn't come back early," he said quietly. "She said she needed the weekend to sort things out." I thought it was about paperwork. Sat back. He had known. He had actively kept me away. He had sat in that car and handed me coffee and played music so I would be relaxed and distracted while my mother coordinated a moving truck and handed my sister a set of keys. It wasn't passive. It was participation. The betrayal I thought was an omission was actually an action. I finished my coffee. I stood up. I thanked him for his honesty. Then I walked out and called Naomi. The neighbor across from my house was an older woman named Mrs. Holloway. I had always liked her. She was the kind of person who noticed things quietly and kept what she saw to herself unless asked. She had a small camera mounted above her front door that she had installed after a package was stolen 2 years earlier. I knocked on her door on a Wednesday afternoon. She let me in without much fuss and made tea while I explained what had happened. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set her mug down and stood up and walked to her laptop on the side table. She turned it to show me. The footage was clear. Timestamp visible in the corner. My mother's car arriving before the moving truck. Diane getting out alone, walking to the front door, and unlocking it with a key she had no business carrying. But it was the second clip that changed everything. It showed Diane entering the house carrying a box under her arm. A dark green box, with a small combination lock on the front. My storage box, the one I kept in my car. The one containing my original closing documents. I stared at the screen. She took it, I said. Not a question. Mrs. Holloway nodded slowly. She came out carrying it too. I didn't understand what I was seeing at the time. I sat very still for a moment. Then I called Naomi and told her we needed to talk about the footage. And about how my mother had obtained documents that should never have been in her hands. When I told Naomi what the footage showed, she was quiet for longer than usual. She took the original documents from your locked box, Naomi said finally. The closing papers. The trust clause. Everything. Yes, I said. That means she knew about the trust, Naomi said. Or she was looking for something that could complicate what she was doing, and she removed it to reduce the risk of you finding out. That realization settled over me like cold water. I had always assumed my mother had made a reckless decision driven by love for Olivia and carelessness about me. I thought she had acted without thinking it all the way through. But this was different. This was not careless. She had gone to the house before the movers arrived. She had taken the one container most likely to hold the evidence that could stop her. She had thought it through. Naomi explained what entering the property without permission meant legally, especially combined with removing documents from inside. It strengthened my position considerably. What had started as an invalid property transfer was now layered with unauthorized entry and document interference. Keep the footage safe, Naomi said. Multiple copies, different locations. Already done, I said. What felt like betrayal that first night at the motel had been transforming steadily, piece by piece, into something else entirely. Something that had a shape and a weight that a courtroom could hold. I drove to the house one afternoon when I knew Olivia would be outside. She was in the front garden with her phone, photographing the new potted plants she'd lined up along the path. She looked up when she saw me park and didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. She smiled. Come to have another look, she said. I didn't answer that. I just walked a few steps closer so we weren't shouting across the garden. Olivia, I said evenly. You understand that nothing has been legally transferred. She tilted her head. Mum handled everything. Mum signed a document that has no legal authority, I said. The house is held in trust. In my name. She laughed. A short, dismissive sound. Mum said you'd say something like that. Then she said something that I have never forgotten. She said it lightly, like it was a throwaway observation. Mum told me you never wanted a family anyway. At least someone appreciates what you had. I didn't react. I kept my face completely neutral. But here is what I noticed. When she finished speaking, she looked at my eyes. And for one small second she frowned. Because whatever she expected to see there, tears, flinching, the satisfying collapse of someone who had been hurt, wasn't there. What she saw instead made her uncertain. I turned and walked back to my car. Naomi called me on a Thursday morning with information that changed the shape of everything. I need you to come in, she said. Today if you can. I was there within the hour. She had been conducting a detailed review of the transfer documents my mother had filed, the ones that had been submitted as part of the attempted transfer process. Naomi had obtained copies through the appropriate legal channels, and she had gone through every page carefully. On page 3 of the agreement, below the section outlining the transfer terms, was a signature line labeled Consenting Party. The name typed beneath it was mine, Claire Whitaker, and there was a signature above it. It was not my signature. I stared at the page for a long time. I have a distinctive signature. Took me years to develop and I have never changed it. What was on that page was a passable imitation, but it was wrong in 3 specific ways that I could identify immediately. My mother hadn't just overstepped. She hadn't just made an unauthorized decision driven by favoritism. She had forged my signature on a legal document. She had tried to make it look like I had agreed. Naomi looked at me carefully from across the desk. "This changes the nature of what we're dealing with," she said quietly. He nodded. I didn't trust my voice for a moment. "Yes," I finally said. "It does." The bank called me on a Friday afternoon. A polite, professionally worded call from a woman in their property lending department, who said she needed to verify some information related to an application connected to my address. I told her calmly that I was the legal owner of the property through a registered trust, and that I had not authorized any application, refinancing, or use of the property as collateral. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said she would need to flag the application for review. I thanked her and hung up. Then I called Naomi immediately. She already knew. A separate inquiry had reached her office that same afternoon. Olivia had formally applied to refinance the house, to use it as security against a loan of considerable size. The application had progressed further than the personal loan because the amounts involved had reached the threshold requiring proper title verification. That verification was now going to reveal everything. Naomi was direct about what this meant. Olivia had now made a formal financial representation to a lender, claiming ownership of a property she had no legal right to. Depending on what she had signed and what she had stated, this could move out of civil property law and into something more serious. She had no idea, I said. No, Naomi agreed. She trusted your mother's version of events completely. I sat with that. Olivia had been reckless and smug and cruel. But she was also operating inside a lie that Diane had built for her, and she had walked into it without looking down. That didn't make me sorry for her. But I understood it. I gave my mother one chance. I drove to her house on a Tuesday evening and asked to speak with her privately, away from Olivia. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where this had all started, and I told her I knew about the trust. I told her I knew about the documents. I told her I knew about the forged signature. I told her I was giving her the opportunity to tell me the truth herself, before anyone else heard it from a different source. Diane looked at me for a long moment. Then she straightened in her chair. "Everything in this family has existed because of what I built," she said. "Everything." "You didn't build the house," I said. "Grandma's money did. And then I did." She shook her head slowly. "You always thought you deserved more than your share." I stayed calm. "I'm asking for what's mine. Nothing more." And then she leaned forward slightly and said the thing I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She said it quietly, almost gently, like she was telling me something she considered obvious. "You were never supposed to have more than your sister." The table went still between us. No more pretense. No more framing it as family decisions or practical arrangements or doing what was best. She had just told me the truth she had been arranging her behavior around for 28 years. This was never about the house. It was about punishment for existing outside her favoritism. Naomi called me 2 days later and asked me to come in. Her voice had the careful, measured quality it took on when she had found something significant. She had uncovered my grandmother's original handwritten letter. It had been attached to the trust documentation at the time the estate was filed, but it had been filed separately from the main papers and had sat in the records without either of us knowing it was there. It was 3 paragraphs in my grandmother's handwriting, sloped and neat the way she wrote everything. Naomi handed me a photocopy and let me read it in silence. My grandmother wrote that the house was intended for me alone. She wrote it clearly, without conditions and without apology. She explained her reasoning in the second paragraph, and when I read it, my eyes filled before I could stop them. She wrote that she was leaving it to Claire because Claire was the only one who ever asked for nothing. I sat there in Naomi's office and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to since the motel. Not from grief this time. Not from anger. From something that felt like being seen. My grandmother had looked at the shape of my life, the quiet contribution, the fixing without credit, the endurance without complaint, and she had understood it. She had taken deliberate action because of it. Someone in my family had seen me clearly, and she had made sure it was recorded. Kevin appeared at my door on a Saturday morning without warning. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping. He said he had been thinking constantly about what he had done and that he needed me to know he was genuinely sorry. I let him talk. I listened to everything he said and I watched his face while he said it, looking for the honest part. He said he hadn't understood how serious it was. He said he should have told me immediately when Diane first called him. He said he had genuinely believed he was doing something small and harmless. He nodded. Then I told him something. Naomi had found, during her review of the transfer documents, a witness signature on one of the supplementary pages. It was a signature confirming that the parties present had entered into the agreement voluntarily. That signature was Kevin's. He stared at me. I signed as a witness at Diane's kitchen table, he said slowly. She said it was just a formality, that you had already agreed verbally and the paperwork was catching up. I had agreed to nothing, I said. He closed his eyes. He hadn't just failed to tell me. He had sat at my mother's kitchen table and put his name on a document that was built on a forged version of mine. Whether he knew that at the time didn't change what it meant now. He left without us resolving anything. There was nothing left to resolve. The legal notice was served on a Wednesday morning. I didn't go to the house myself. Naomi arranged for a process server, which is the correct and professional way these things are done. I parked across the street, far enough that no one would notice me, and I watched. The server walked up the path and knocked. Olivia answered in the casual way of someone who wasn't expecting anything difficult. She took the envelope. She read the front. Her face shifted. She read the first page. The confidence that had been sitting on her face since the day she stood in my doorway with her arms crossed. The certainty that she had won something, that the arrangement was settled and I had accepted my smaller portion. That confidence cracked. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But I watched it happen in real time and it was not satisfying in the way I expected. It was just true. Diane appeared behind her seconds later. When she saw what Olivia was holding, she looked across the street. I don't know if she saw me or not. But she started speaking loudly enough that I could hear pieces of it through my closed car window. She is destroying this family, Diane said. I started the car. No, I said quietly to no one. I stopped letting you destroy me. Things unraveled quickly after the notice was served. Faster than I expected, though Naomi had told me this was common. Once the legal machinery started moving, the story that held everything together began to fall apart at its seams. Relatives who had initially heard Diane's version of events, that I was being selfish, that I had always been difficult, that Olivia simply needed the house more, started calling me directly after pieces of the real situation leaked through family conversations. The forged signature in particular traveled quickly. Someone mentioned it to an aunt, who mentioned it to a cousin, and within a week a version of the truth was moving through my extended family faster than Diane's narrative could chase it. Olivia and Diane stopped presenting a united front almost immediately. Olivia blamed Diane for not telling her the house was in a trust. Diane blamed Olivia for the refinancing application, which had accelerated the legal complications. They argued loudly enough that neighbors heard it. The two women who had stood together in my doorway handing over my keys while a moving truck blocked my driveway were now directing their energy entirely at each other. Kevin stopped returning Diane's calls. He sent me one final text saying he was cooperating fully with Naomi's office if needed. I didn't reply, but I forwarded it to Naomi. The court date was set for a morning 6 weeks after the notice was served. In the weeks leading up to it, Olivia's solicitor, a man who seemed increasingly uncomfortable with his client's situation the more the facts emerged, reached out to Naomi about a private settlement. The offer was simple. Olivia would vacate the property without a formal ruling. In return, I would agree not to pursue the financial fraud angle any further. She would absorb the loan costs herself and we would all move on quietly. Naomi presented it to me neutrally, the way good solicitors do. I thought about it for one evening. I thought about the moving truck, the banner of keys in my mother's hand, Olivia's smile in the doorway, Kevin's silence in the passenger seat, my grandmother's handwritten letter sitting in a county filing cabinet for 6 years waiting to be read by someone who needed it. I thought about being called strong in a way that meant disposable. And I thought about the forged signature. My name written in someone else's hand on a document designed to make it look like I had surrendered what I never agreed to give. I called Naomi the next morning. "Tell them no," I said. I was done with silence. I was done with private arrangements that kept the truth politely hidden. If the facts were going to be established, I wanted them established somewhere that couldn't be edited later. The night before the hearing, I drove to the house. I didn't go inside. I didn't have a speech prepared or a confrontation planned. I just drove there and parked across the street, the same spot I had used when the notice was served, and sat in the dark looking at the front of it. The pendant lights Olivia had installed were on. I could see them through the front window, those lights she had photographed and hashtagged. The potted plants she had lined up along the path had started to wilt because she'd planted them in the wrong type of soil, which I could have told her, but hadn't been asked. I tried to find rage and couldn't locate it. What I found instead was something steady and quiet. A deep, even sense of my own position. I had not done anything wrong. I had not manipulated anyone or fabricated anything or forged a single signature. I had simply done what I had always done. Kept records, read documents, understood the details that other people found boring. And this time those habits had turned out to matter enormously. I didn't need the house to prove I was worth protecting. My grandmother had already understood that. She had written it down. Tomorrow I wanted justice. Not revenge. Not drama. Just the truth said clearly. In a room where it couldn't be rewritten afterward. The courtroom was smaller than I expected and quieter than I feared. Naomi had prepared everything with her usual precision. She presented the case in layers, each piece building on the one before it, the way a well-constructed argument should move. First came the original trust documentation, filed at the time of purchase, naming me as sole beneficiary with no authority granted to any other family member. Then came the county records confirming that my mother had never held legal title to the property. Then came the transfer agreement with the forged signature, along with a handwriting analysis report commissioned by Naomi's office. Then came Mrs. Holloway's security footage, time-stamped and clear. My mother entering the house alone before the movers arrived, carrying the locked document box out under her arm. Then came the bank records showing Olivia's refinancing application and the representations she had made to the lender about ownership. And finally, Naomi handed the court a certified copy of my grandmother's handwritten letter. The registrar read it quietly before passing it to the judge. The judge asked the county records clerk a single confirming question. The clerk confirmed under oath that Diane had never held any legal ownership interest in the property at any point. The courtroom went completely silent. I watched Olivia turn slowly in her seat and look at my mother. Diane had nothing left. No script. No framing. No version of events that fit what was now in front of her. She said nothing. The judge's ruling was straightforward. The attempted transfer was declared invalid. Olivia was ordered to vacate the property within 30 days. The forged signature was referred to the appropriate authorities for fraud investigation. The refinancing application was flagged to the lending institution with a formal explanation of the property's legal status. Naomi told me afterward that Kevin had submitted a written statement confirming the circumstances under which he had signed as a witness, which was taken into account during the proceedings. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon was bright and slightly cold. I stood on the steps while Naomi spoke with her assistant about the next steps, and I became aware of someone standing near me. Vin. She looked older than she had the morning she locked me out. Something about the way she was standing was different. The certainty that had always been the loudest thing about her was simply gone. She reached out and touched my arm. "Please," she said. Just that word. Please. No sentence to go with it. No request made specific enough to be refused or agreed to. Just that one word from a woman who had run out of moves. I looked at her hand on my arm. I thought about the table she had sat at when she said I was never supposed to have more than my sister. I stepped back gently. "You already did this," I said. "It's done." Then I walked down the steps to where Naomi was waiting. 6 weeks later, I stood inside the house for the last time. Olivia had vacated cleanly and on time, which surprised me slightly. She hadn't taken everything. There were a few items left in the kitchen that weren't hers to begin with and weren't mine either. I arranged for them to be collected. The pendant lights were still hanging over the dining area. I left them. I had no use for them. What I did take was the one thing I came for. My grandmother's dining table, which had been returned to its original position in the dining room. I ran my hand along the surface of it. The grain was smooth and familiar. This table had sat in her house through my entire childhood. It had been the center of every meal that felt like home. I had it moved to a storage unit while I sorted out the next steps. Then I stood alone in the middle of the empty front room and looked at the afternoon light coming through the window. The same light I had always liked about this house. The way it moved across the floor in the late afternoon, warm and slow. I sold the property 8 weeks later. On my terms, at a price I was satisfied with, to a young couple who walked through it twice and said it felt like a home. I used the money to relocate to a city where I had been offered a position I had been too settled to take before all of this happened. I found a flat with good windows and signed the lease with my own name and no one else involved. I kept my grandmother's letter, framed, on the wall beside my desk where I could see it every morning. She had known what she was doing when she made that trust. She had known exactly what kind of people surrounded me and exactly what they were capable of. And she had acted quietly in advance in the way that real protection works. They had tried to take the house. What they didn't realize was that the house was never the most important thing she had left me. The most important thing was proof that someone had seen me clearly and decided I was worth protecting long before I understood it myself. That was something no moving truck could carry away. No forged signature could erase. No locked door could keep me from. It was already mine. Had always been mine.